Okay, I think, Megan, I hope you can hear me. So thank you everyone for coming to our webinar. We're very excited about this one and this dashboarding capability and feature that we've been working on for quite a long time. Eric, if you can quickly pop to the next slide. I just want to take literally 1 minute here to just say there's in your panel, in your GoToWebinar, there's a control panel when you join the webinar, and you may not see all of these tabs, but there will be or should be a questions tab in there. If you have a question, please type it in there. My colleague Megan is also on the call with us, and we'll answer your questions either by replying to you, or we certainly have reserved a little bit of time for questions at the end of the webinar as well. We're going to spend literally just a few minutes. As you can see, Eric just has 3 or 4 slides on there on an intro and some concepts, and then jump right into a demo of this dashboarding feature. And my colleague Eric, who's on the webinar with me, whose screen we're seeing now, is going to do the webinar for us. So with that brief intro, over to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome and thank you for attending. This feature has been something near and dear to my heart for the past, probably close to a year now, as we've been designing and developing it. We have a lot of hopes that it's going to be very useful to our customers. The feature is all about reporting, dashboarding. We're kind of using them synonymously here. And what we've done is built a feature into frevvo, so it's right there, that allows designers to construct dashboards or reports, however they want to think about them, that directly report on form and workflow data. Okay, so it's a very flexible way to design things. Basically, a dashboard can control many charting or table elements that are basically connected or directly linked to the submissions of individual forms and workflows. And so that allows a lot of flexibility. A dashboard can report against one form or workflow, or it can report against many, all within one dashboard to aggregate that data. So it's a lot of flexibility in how the feature is designed. So there's 2 parts to it, right? I just mentioned that there's a designer, a builder, if you will. And then of course there's a runtime piece where the actual dashboard can be deployed and looked at by your end users, okay? You being the designer. So the designer is really, we're leveraging our existing technology for our form designer. Really allows you to drag and drop charts and tables from a palette, and then you can configure those individual charts and tables up to, like I mentioned earlier, the submissions of various forms and workflows. So they're really, we consider them data sources for those charts and tables. And as part of that, you can sort of customize that. You can build customizable filters, so you're bringing just the subset of data that you want to show within that chart or table, okay? As I mentioned, we're basing this on our form technology, so very similar to a form, we can deploy these anywhere we want to. We can put a dashboard inside of a space. We can take a share link and put it onto a website somewhere. However you want to do it, it's that you can do with a form, you can do with a dashboard as well. Major difference, of course, though, that they are really about displaying data, analytical data specifically, right? About the business data that's generated from your workflow process is what you're presenting within one of these things. So to that end, they're not like a form, and you can't submit it. There's really no way to submit a dashboard. It just doesn't make sense in this context. I already mentioned in the last point here that a lot of flexibility. You can have one dashboard that reports on one form or workflow or many. It's up to you to design it the way you want to. Okay, so we're hoping that this opens up a whole new dimension to dashboard, workflow design, right? When you go to design your workflow, really we're hoping that what you can now do is think about the reporting and monitoring that you want to do and build that into your workflow design, okay? And to that end, we really recommend knowing your stakeholders. What are their needs out of this process? What are they contributing to the process? What information do they have that's maybe ancillary to the process? Because all those things can factor into a richer experience in terms of monitoring information about the business, right? And out of that analysis, the goal is to identify strategic and operational information, right? And then, come up with specific concrete metrics and KPIs that are of interest to your stakeholders, okay? And from there, it just kind of, out of that, you can sort of say, what do I need to collect as part of the process to make that possible, okay? So to build, sort of to run through a mental, well, I actually ran through this myself with an existing workflow process we have here and make available to our customers, and sort of thought about, okay, what would be nice? So I took the basic purchase order process, which is downloadable from our website, and it has 3 simple steps. It's really a minimalist purchase order process where you have a preparer that initiates the purchase details. You have a management approval step, and then finally finance completes and confirms submittal of the invoice to the vendor, or sorry, to the PO to the vendor. Very, very basic, okay? And I started to think about, okay, try to come up with some real world or semi-real world needs for this, right? And started to think about what else we could be doing here, right? In terms of capturing information and really analyzing the business processes as we go, right? So, thinking about the stakeholders, I mean, general management wants certain metrics and KPIs potentially. For instance, anything that you purchase typically has a need by date. I need to have this purchased by such a date in order to keep this other business, this other process going without, going out of stock for a particular thing we need or something like that. So that's an interesting thing. Are we receiving everything by the time we need it by, right? From a budgetary or accounting perspective, it would be nice to know if these purchases are within budget or out of budget, right? Or above or exceeding budget. It'd be good to know. Many businesses will contract rates with suppliers, right? Rates on products that they buy, right? So the contract with those suppliers. But it would be nice to know, are we following those and using those contracted rates with agreed suppliers or contracted suppliers? Or if we're not, we're going to loosely in the industry, it's called managed spend. Managed spend is what I'm spending with contracted suppliers at contracted rates. From an overall management perspective, at any point in time, I might want to know my outstanding commitment, like what POs are in process that I'm going to be needing to make purchases for, so that outstanding commitment is there, and be good to know that at any point in time. As an overall management, I'd like to know maybe a breakdown of purchasing by department or by preparer or by item types or whatever, any number of different dimensions that you can sort of sum up purchases and look at how you're doing from time to time. Along with that, you might want to look at, for different items, you might want to know what's the unit price I'm paying. Is that varying over time? And that could be analysis you're doing, looking for efficiencies, that kind of thing. Rejection rates, again, thinking about efficiencies. I mean, rejected purchase orders are an inefficient or a sign of inefficiency. So looking at rejection rates, what preparers, what department have higher rates than others. I like to think of, that's all businessy type of information that we want to get. There's also operational, like basically focusing on the workflow process itself. Like what are the operational things going on there? Maybe looking at active procurements, your cycle times. If cycle times are starting to exceed certain lengths, then that could point to a problem potentially. And obviously errors, common ones like maybe emails don't go through, or if your workflow has a connection or a post to an outside source or an outside web point, and that fails. We need to know about those things in real time. So operationally, we need a dashboard that could tell us that kind of information potentially, okay? So with all that in mind, and considering the original purchase order purchase order process that was very simple, we could potentially add a couple of extra steps to collect information that's relevant and makes it possible for us to present these metrics and KPIs, performance indicators. So, with that in mind, what I've talked about led me to believe that, okay, let's add a contracting step where, maybe accounting is, contract. So the contracting departments can say, okay, you're using the right supplier and the rates are per contract or not. They basically figuring that out. Maybe you flip that around. Maybe the contracting step actually applies, figures out who the supplier is to buy this from. I don't know. It depends on your process. But for my little process here, I said the contracting step the person responsible for that's going to determine if the proper supplier is correct and the rates are correct per contract. A budgetary step, so maybe accounting can say, okay, for this particular purchase, what's the budget number that was going to go towards this purchase, and are we exceeding that budget or not? Okay, so that's that budgetary step that I added to this process. And then finally, in red, the other new step here is the receiving step. So to close this out, have we got the product, the items that we wanted? Is the order complete? What date? When did we receive it? That opens up a bunch of possibilities in terms of reporting if we have that information. Okay. All right. So that being said, there's this process I built, and that's going to drive the demo dashboards that I'm going to show you from this point forward. Okay. So I am thinking about this and in designing the dashboards for this theoretical problem, this process that the semi-real world process that I built. I sort of designed the dashboards along sort of concept, because there was a lot of information to present. I actually broke it down into at least four different dashboards that were focused. So one was focused on just general management, managers of the overall business process, what information they might want. I broke it down, and I created another one that's focused on accounting and budgetary information, another one for contract compliance, and then finally the last one is sort of the operational procurement process, operational information. So somebody who's just doesn't really care about what departments are spending what, but just wants to look at the workflow. How's it operating? Are there any problems? Anything that needs attention? Okay, so I'm now going to show you some dashboards that were designed with frevvo against this process. Okay, the tail end, I'll quickly show how you go about designing one of these. But right now, let's just show some runtime dashboards in process. Okay. So the first one is the dashboard that's focused for management, the management of the business process. Okay, they're interested in where the spend is, that kind of thing. But since this is the first one we're going to show, I'm going to show you some stuff about it. First of all, every dashboard has a header. Allows you to put a nice little caption up there. That's the top 3 boxes are part of the header here, and you can caption it so everybody knows what they're looking at. The box below that is sort of a status box. And since dashboards have sort of like multiple layers of security, one is that the dashboard itself can be run by certain users or roles. Okay, that's one thing. You can also set up security of who can actually edit a dashboard. That's just the way we do things in frevvo. So that's who can access or who can edit the dashboard. Okay. Then below that, we have another layer of security, which is at the data source or the workflow or the form level, where you decide who can access the submission data based on roles or particular users. Okay, so that's the data that they have access to. And so it's important to know when you're looking at a dashboard, okay, who's viewing it and what time, because that is a point in time when the data is available, what data is available at that point in time, and then based on who's looking at it, the data could be different based on their access to the underlying data. Okay, so that's why these statuses are important. And then finally, you can optionally put a filter, right? So the filter can be applied to anywhere flexibly applied to anywhere within the dashboard. It's up to the designer to decide that. And that's what this little filter icon is about. It toggles the display of what we call the filter, filter panel, whatever. And we'll see that in the designer, but basically the designer of the dashboard can drop whatever they want in terms of input controls and then use those in the individual chart elements to build a filter that gets applied. So it's sort of a dynamic filter. In this case, I built a filter, very relatively simple one with a start of period, end of period, which are 2 date controls that allow you to control the data that you're showing based on the time period. Okay. So for this dashboard, we could sort of think of it as 3 rows. The first one is sort of process analysis. So here in the far left, in-time purchases. Really, these are purchases that the requester said I need it by this time. And so this KPI control is what we're calling it, or you can think of it as a numeric control as well. It's showing the percentage for this. Well, in this case, it's not tied to the period. It's just for the current calendar quarter. What percentage of the purchases were received in time, okay? So it's a percentage. The designer has the ability to sort of control what numbers are showing there. In this case, I decided to roll everything up by quarter. The designer also has the ability to indicate or decide whether a trend indicator is going to be shown. In this case, it's not too, it's not terribly useful. The trend is that it was unchanged from the previous quarter. It stayed flat, so it's 50% were on time for the previous quarter as well. But that trend indicator can obviously indicate up or down by a certain percentage. Moving to the right, so the average, here we wanted to see the cycle time, average purchase order cycle time. So how quick are we getting these things through the cycle, right? From an average perspective over this time period. And there's a little, and this is showing a radial gauge control. And there's a little, I mean, the nice thing about this is that you can, the designer can indicate ranges within that radial gauge so that there's some context to the number, right? The number of days is 24.43. Is that good? Well, in this case, it's kind of okay. It's not great. It would be in the green if it were great. And so, you know, the context behind that. And then all the way to the right, I'm showing an example of a data table, okay? So this is really the details. This is the way I like to design things. You don't have to do this. It's just what I did. I dropped a table next to these things. So this is the details of all the purchases that are happening within that, that time period. I chose the columns because I figured anybody who's using this would be looking at cycle times and want to know information that could be driving that cycle time, like the vendor, or if it was approved, or who or what department was doing it, that kind of thing, including, you know, the need by date and receive by date, so they can see what the difference is and figure out where potential problems are. That's just the way I decided to design things, with the details available on the table. Moving down, the next row is really focused on cost efficiency. So here's an example of a column chart where I am showing average unit prices per item. And, you know, if you vary the filter above there, you can sort of like look at things during time for different time periods to see if the average price that we're getting or spending on items is changing. So that's what that's all about. And then obviously to the right, again, another table with details, okay? And I'll just point out these tables can be used, there's a filter just to narrow down the data. So say I wanted to look at emergency, and it would just show what's going on with the emergency department in this case, because this is data for a hospital, okay, as an example. And then I can also sort. So I can sort by received date, or sort by need by, you know, I can sort by columns, whatever. And there's paging going on. So if there's more, you know, the designer has full control over the size of these pages. But if, you know, say the page was 10 and we had 100 of them, so you'd have 10 pages of data available, and you can sort of page through that. Just showing the flexibility of this control, and the designer has full control over that. The last area is really about completion rejection. So I wanted to show completed for this period, what completed purchase orders we have. So again, just as a good point of reference to see everything that's been completed. And then analyzing our rejected approved purchases, right? Broken down by department. Where do we have problems with rejected purchases? Well, we had one in pediatrics, but it was only one, so probably not a real problem. And then the details behind that, all the rejected purchase orders in this table. So here I had the ability to construct a filter to just show the rejected purchase orders in this table, okay, to isolate on just what we're interested in here. Okay, so that's an example of one dashboard, shows a bunch of different capabilities that management and data that management might be interested in. Here's one that's focused on budget. Oh, let me go back real quick. So let's go back to the management one and just show that the filter, so if I'm interested in narrowing this down, so every control here, every item in here except for the very first one is tied into this filter. So if I'm interested in, you know, narrowing this down from maybe January 1st to maybe August 1st at the end of the year, you see that automatically the numbers update based on that range. Okay. Now the first one did not, because it's based on current quarter only. Okay, just as an example. Okay. So let's move forward. So here's a budgetary compliance dashboard. So somebody that's just concerned with budget, you know, county's just concerned with budget here, let's say, that, you know, that stakeholder would use this one exclusively, or maybe, you know, anybody could, but it's up to you to decide who gets access to it. So first area, again, we're showing another KPI where we're showing in-budget purchases. So assuming the county's been, you know, assigning budgetary numbers, we can have, we can construct something that figures out for the purchases in this time period, what percentage of them were in budget. I can break down, in the middle here, we have a breakdown of purchases by department. So we're aggregating total purchase up for this time period by department. The pie chart to the right of that is just a whole part relationship of that similar information, just so you can get, you know, a picture of where spend is going. There could be interesting insights coming out of that. Moving down all the way to the left here, we have an example of a radar chart. And this is an interesting way to show multidimensional data and give a quick picture of things that stick out, dimensions that stick out. So in this case, the dimensions are my departments. And then the metric that we're showing here is really the dollar spent over budget for that time period. And, you know, potentially we have a problem with surgery going over budget here. You know, needs to be dug into a little bit, but potentially. In the middle, we have a breakdown by managers that have approved spend over budget, and we're showing the total dollar amount that they've approved over budget, okay? Just showing different ways we can aggregate that. And then here we have for active purchase orders for this time period that fall within this time period. I mean, you can do this any way you want, but just showing the actual commitment that we haven't approved, you know, it's not been completely spent yet. You know, those purchase orders are in process, okay? And then finally, I just show the details, the purchase details for this time period, so that if you have questions about anything above here, you can sort of dig into this and sort of look at the details and figure out what the problems are, potentially. Okay, here's an example of a dashboard that's focused on the contract compliance stakeholder, okay? So here, this person can focus in on, for the purchases within this period, which of them were against contracted suppliers, and we're calling that managed, like managed purchases. And so it's 49%. And I forgot to mention that, and when you ever have a KPI control, you have the ability to enter a goal percent. And the goal percent that I entered as a designer was higher than this. Thing was like 75%. So in that case, if it's not meeting the goal, we do show it in red, or whatever color you as the designer specify, with a little icon that says you're missing that goal. Okay, total flexibility. Same sort of logic I showed you earlier. The trend that could be here. This case is just over a total range. I'm not showing a trend, but with trend, the trend will be up or down, red or green, basically, depending on if it's meeting goal or not. In the middle, we have again another example of the Radial Gauge chart showing your unmanaged purchases. So here I just picked out just the purchases that were not contracted and going against the optimal rates, and sum those up over that period with a little context, so that myself as the designer, I decided, okay, for this period, what makes sense for being a good number or not so good number. And then a breakdown, again, isolating and summing just the unmanaged purchases for this period by department is what this donut chart is showing a whole part relationship of that. Skipping down to the lower right, showing unmanaged purchases by quarter. So this is one that's not going to be tied into the filter that we have here. So this filter is also prevalent on this one, but this one I wanted to break down by quarter, so you can see a trend over time of unmanaged purchases over all departments. Here, based on requester, who is, since in my workflow, the requester has the choice of choosing the supplier. I wanted to show like who of the requesters is using, has an excessive unmanaged total, right? So I'm breaking down and showing a column chart that's showing multiple metrics for each dimension, the dimension being the requester, and the blue is the total purchase they've requested over this time period, and red is what is unmanaged. And you can see that, one person here, then one in the middle has everything they've requested is uncontracted, which is potentially a problem. And then always the details, focused with just the fields that make sense for contracting. So these tables, believe it or not, have different columns. I picked out the ones that made sense for, somebody's trying to investigate a problem with contracting. Okay. But again, it's all the details that match this time period. Okay. And then finally, there's the operational dashboard, okay? And this is, again, as I mentioned, somebody's less focused on the business, more focused on the process itself. So we have any point in time showing the active purchases that are for this time range, okay? And we can see a breakdown by department in this pie chart with details to the right, just in case the operational person needs to investigate something. Then we have operational errors using a Radial Gauge chart again. And with some context to it, during this period, we had some problems with some emailing a few submissions, probably an invalid email address, something like that. That's going to be a common one that will come up. And then at the bottom, we have longest. So here I've picked out the longest with my data source and my filter. I've picked out the longest purchase order cycle times. Well, I've organized them from longest to shortest and limited to the top, X number of them, just so that it becomes clear that we have an issue, looking for outliers, potentially seeing what the problem was. And this is by purchase order, and then we show the number of days along the bottom. This is the example of a bar chart. And then again, a table that's focused just on that completed purchase order details, so you can dig into the details if you need to, okay? Because cycle times are always by definition completed purchase orders. Okay, all right. So that's an example that I built showing you what you can do, give you a feel for what you can do with the dashboard. So going back to the very first dashboard, the one that's oriented towards management, briefly wanted to show you what this, frevvo has the ability to design forms and flows once and then render them what's appropriate for either desktop or mobile or tablet or whatever. So that capability flows forward to dashboards as well. So here's just showing you right now on a simulator for an iPhone, this exact same dashboard showing in an iPhone. You still have the filter, so you can fill in information and narrow down the period of time if you want to with the filter. And then, based on your, we're on a phone, so everything sort of goes full width, so you can see the complete element, if you will. So here we have the KPI, we have the Radial Gauge, the table, you can scroll left and right, show information within the table. Yeah, you get the idea. So, and things kind of lay out from top to bottom. Okay, all right. All right, so I think that's all I wanted to show you there. Yeah. Okay, so let's go into the designer, just to give you the briefest taste of what you can do within the designer. But before I do that, let me just give you a quick overview of how this works within frevvo. So frevvo has things organized by projects, and I've just created in this server instance I've got here, I've got one project called Dashboard Demo. Okay, I'm going to open that project, and I see the various workflows and forms that I have, and we've been reporting off this thing called the Enhanced Purchase Order Process. I put submissions in for that to give us data that we've been looking at in our demo. With dashboards, there's a new item under projects, the project itself, called dashboards, okay? And it's a separate list of all the dashboards, and these 4 red flagged dashboards in this list you see are the ones we've been looking at, okay? But it's very similar. The paradigm is very similar to what you can do with forms and workflows. So if I click this, I can create a new dashboard. I can upload an existing dashboard. In other words, you have the ability to export them to a zip file just like you can a form or flow, and then you can re-upload them elsewhere. That's typically used for deployment or backing up or whatever you might want to do. Dashboard, has the ability to, I mentioned permissions, so we can decide who can start the dashboard, who can edit the dashboard, and it could be roles or users, specific users that you can assign that permission to. All right. We can share a dashboard, so we can get a share link and put that into a space, or we can put that on a website somewhere, however you want to do it. So the dashboard comes up and you can sort of see that externally. We can deploy, so the dashboards are still controlled by the same deployment, undeploy, the same production limits. You buy a certain number of things that you can deploy. I mentioned previously we can download. We can also translate. So if we want a dashboard in German, we can design a dashboard, then we can upload And we can download translation files, get them translated for certain languages, upload them, and then we can have one in German, we can have one in French, whatever we like. Same dashboard. Okay. I'm going to show you the editor. So before I do that, let's duplicate one just in case they make any changes. I don't want to mess it up here. So I just created a copy of the procurement dashboard, which is the first one I showed you. I'm going to go into the editor. First thing I'll bring to your attention is that since this has been pre-built, it's already been set up and is bringing data from the source forms and workflows that it's hooked. In this case, it's all hooked up to one workflow. So it's the submission data from that one workflow. You'll notice that in edit mode, the data is shown because we want to see the data. We want to see what it looks like. And it's just it's typically a subset, especially for tables, it's just a subset of the data. And when you go to use mode and actually run the dashboard, you get obviously the full data. But edit mode, we want to show you a sample of it. You see the header up here, but I want to bring your attention. So up here, we really have three views, and we're in the dashboard view, which really has the palette to the left, the canvas in the center of the thing. This is very similar and to designing a form. Okay, you have the palette, the canvas. We also have rules, so you can set up rules, and typically rules are going to be manipulating your filter elements somehow. So if you're designing a filter, maybe you want to have a derived value that you then use in the filter. So you may have a couple of input elements, a rule that fires on those when data is put into them, derive something, and then use that as the filter. Any number of things you can do. We've exposed the full power of rules here, so you can do that. But you can also hide and show elements, including the dashboard elements. So based on, I don't know, just imagine something where for some user picks something in their filter, and then I want to show a different set of dashboard elements. Well, you can do that with rules as well. Okay, that's possible. A lot of possibilities. I mean, the possibilities are endless, right? And then finally, in the settings, not a ton of interesting information here, but I will bring there's another way to get to access control. So just like I showed you earlier, that you can do it here as well. Who can start it? Who can edit the dashboard? And then the other thing is in the style, we can give our dashboard a width. And here I've assigned a custom width of 1400 pixels. Okay, so I want to mention, I already mentioned the header, and this filter is important because this filter area really goes with the filter palette. So off to the left here, we have a filter palette with a series of controls that you can drop only within this filter area when it's exposed. And that's how you would build up your filter with input elements, okay? The filters are then used within each of these charting elements to do a filter of the data that we want applied there, okay? So that's the filter palette, and that's got everything you'd expect, various input elements, date, text, money, quantity, drop downs, radius, checkbox, all the things that you're used to can go in that filter area. Let me collapse that. Then we have the dashboard palette, okay, which shows all the different visualization controls that we can show. So let me just show an example here. Let me just drag and drop a pie chart, okay? And what we do is anytime you drop something, you haven't hooked up the real data yet, so we show some sample data just so you can get a feel for what it looks like. When that chart is selected, I get a settings toolbar here, and that's got the most important thing. I mean, obviously the label can change. I can change the label to whatever I want it to be. Just pie or whatever, that's fine, doesn't really matter. And I could hide and show that label if I want to, but the data showing is a big button for edit configuration. I'll show that in a second, but it's indicated it's not configured. So we haven't tied it to any data source. So the data we're looking at is just sample data, okay? There's the ability to control the width of it, the height of it, that kind of thing, nothing too crazy there. And then there's a new chart styles where we can set up labeling. So if I want the data to appear, here we're showing the widgets of a pie, the various widgets and their percent of our production, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. So things like that, I can show a legend if I want to, a legend up top, total control there. So here's an example of a bar chart, again with sample data. the styles are different for our bar chart, as you would expect. I mean, we can control over lots of different things, fonts and colors and labels, and specific things for the x-axis, specific things for the y-axis. So if I want to say, give a rotation on the y-axis, which is the tick labels, I can do that. I can add the labels inside if I want to, showing the actual number that that bar chart represents. All kinds of things, including even if I want to change the color of the font, I got a nice color picker here to do that. Let's collapse this real quick. And then there's a color palette. It will select that for the different, in this case, we've got multiple metrics, so it's picking from the color palette to show that. Okay. Okay. Let me get rid of that. We have an example of an area chart, or for that matter, a line chart. They're very similar. Again, I'm not going to go through details here, but this is just an example of different charts you can put onto this thing. We already showed a data table. I mean, I've shown them already, but it's a simple drag and drop with, here we got an example of, there's just sample data, again, meaningless sample data. We can control different styles of that. If we want paging, we can, or if we don't want paging, we can turn that off. So all the data comes down at once. Various things you can do here. Won't go into all the details. And then let's see, I guess there's Radial Gauge. We showed that earlier. We've seen an example of that, sorry. And then there's the KPI control, which is kind of shows up kind of ugly, but you have the ability to configure that, including turning the label on or off, overriding the label, things like that. Again, you're typically going to show a number here, and typically a percentage, but it can be a raw number as well, total spend or whatever. We showed examples of both in the PO commitment, and right here we got an example of a percentage. Okay. All right, so let me just select that KPI and just show real quick the settings I've done here. So I've given a goal. The goal here is to maximize the in-time purchases. I've given a target of 75%, 0.75, so that if I were to lower that, in real time, say I want 0.4 is good enough, all of a sudden it turns green because we've exceeded that value, okay? You have total control over whether trend is showing up or not, so I can take the trend off if I want to. Okay, so that's that. And then I'm going to select the Radial Gauge chart now and just show you this has already been configured, and you can see that's green, it's checked for configured, so it's tied to a data source already. I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So the first, it's a series of screens you go through. First is you pick the source of the data. In this case, I only have those two flows that I talked about, and it's already been configured to the enhanced purchase order process. Right. So the next screen, in this case, it's a simple metric for all time. I can, we've broken this down so that you think of things in terms of dimensions and metrics. So for instance, if I'm interested in the total spend for departments, department would be my dimension, the metric would be a sum of the total spend. That would be the metric we're showing here. In this case, we're showing a radial gauge where we just want to see the average time, right? So we're doing an average of days between PO date and receive date. And this is, we've got a user-friendly sort of builder, if you will, that allows you to build an expression, okay, using functions and fields within the data source, okay? So it's pretty simple. We did the average function of the days between the PO date and the receive date. Pretty simple. We gave it a name, we called it days, and then we can format. We can apply formatters to that data. So the format, and we have an abundant number of them. In this case, I was dealing with a number, so I just chose a standard number format, so the number of days is clearly shown. All right, that just gives you a rough feel. There's a lot more that can be done. And then I built a filter. Here I was interested in things that were already submitted, were approved by the manager. I want to make sure that the receive date contained a value. That's probably was unnecessary, but whatever. And then I wanted the PO date between that start and end period. Okay, so here's an example where I built a semi-complex filter. I've ended a bunch of conditions together, okay? And that these pluses and minuses allow you to add and add an and condition or condition is sort of a way of building up a filter expression, if you will, with different clauses. Most importantly, in the last one here, so here I've templated it to one of the filter values. You saw those before, the start and end period, right? So I can actually drop down this and pick those control templates that are available. The system knows what they are. So here I pick start period, and that allows me to only show the data in this radial gauge that is falling within that period. Is honored after the start and is honored before the end period, okay? The final screen just shows you sample data, and it actually goes out and computes it. So you can say, oh, as a designer, that looked correct to me. And then I finish it, and then the data is shown in the chart itself. Okay. Okay, that's about all I wanted to cover today. Hopefully this was informative for you, and we're excited to get this new feature ready. It's going to be coming up in the next release and be available to people, at least on a beta perspective. So it's coming out soon. Okay, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. That was great. We do have a few questions here for you. I think you basically answered the first one, which was, when will this be launched? There are a few of those. When can I get this?
They may be looking for more specific dates. I don't know.
Yeah, we're not the engineering side here in terms of having an exact date, but it is, as you can see, it has been built. It is currently in testing. We'll start rolling this out real soon, and obviously we're eager to get it out into customers' hands as well. So we will be informing everybody as soon as possible. Another question here, which was interesting, I don't actually know the answer, Eric, is can you connect dashboards to external data sources such as the SQL database?
Right, and the answer is right now, no. It's on our roadmap for consideration. We realize that this is focused on the process itself, but there's ancillary data that can enhance this, and we understand that's a need, and that's something we're definitely considering for a future release.
Okay. You can, however, since forms and workflows themselves can be connected to SQL databases, is it true then that you can pull data into the SQL data from the SQL database into the form or workflow and then operate a dashboard off of that?
Yeah, I mean, still it's going to be off of a submission. So that form or workflow is going to pull the data and then in the form of a submission, submit it to frevvo, and then it's available within the dashboard. So it's kind of a little bit indirect, but it's an interesting thought. Is that a way to solve that problem? I'm not sure.
Right.
Depends.
Another question, which I know the answer to, is drill downs, and I believe that's also in V2 of this thing, right?
Yeah. Yep. We fully envision the ability to, maybe within a table, pick a row and then have it go to a drill down more detail, or maybe a bar chart or a column chart, select on a column and go to some design detail that explodes that information behind that chart. It's not in the first release. It was just a matter of scope, but definitely that one I would say is more firmly on the roadmap.
Okay. Okay. Another question is, you said this is just a form, so we use a number of portals, frevvo spaces. So can we use this as part of that? Oh, I assume that means as part of a frevvo space.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. So it can be. Is the answer basically that it can be used or placed wherever a form can be? So that there's a share URL for it.
Yep, share URL. Yep, I mentioned that briefly in the demo.
Okay.
Anywhere that a form can go, a dashboard can go.
Okay, super. Another question is the dashboard limited to workflows within its project? Within its project. Oh, okay. So you showed how it's sitting in a project. Yeah. Yeah.
So the answer is no. It can pull in anything that I have access to the submissions of, or I can edit. I can pull in that as a data source. So it's going to be within the same tenant, but it can be in other projects. It can be in other users. Yes.
Okay.
Other owned by other designers. I meant by other users.
Okay. Great. And then the last question is basically, can you, if time permitting, Eric, could you show building a new simple chart of total dollars spent by department or manager in each month? I guess a brand new chart or a brand new dashboard itself.
So they want total spend.
Total dollars spent by department or by manager. Total, like some sort of aggregation, I think, of total dollars spent
So I
by.
actually have that in one of these. Well, let's do it.
Yeah, why don't you do it?
Okay, so let's do total spend by department, let's say. Okay.
Sure.
And we'll do that as a column chart, let's say. Okay, so I dragged and dropped a column chart. I'm going to configure the data for that. I'm going to pick my enhanced purchase order process. I'm going now. So now with the column chart, I'm presented with a prompt for a dimension and a metric. In this case, our department is the dimension and the total spend is the department. Okay, so I'm going to pick the drop down for the dimension, and you'll see a list of all the fields. These are fields from the source workflow. Okay, and they're separated in 2 different areas. This is the ones that I've designated. The top list is what I've designated as the searchable fields within that formal workflow. And then the bottom are the metadata fields that are available to all submissions, okay? Things like the duration or the start date, that kind of thing. They can be useful in certain situations, but this is clearly a businessy kind of question. So I'm gonna look up in the submission, the fields from the former flow for the information I want, and I see department, so I'm gonna pick that. No need to aggregate that. This is an aggregation, right? We're gonna do a total spend, but I'm not gonna aggregate the department. What I'm gonna do is aggregate the metric, okay? The metric we want to be the total spend. I'm just gonna remember my fields here, and I think we have grand total, the grand total of the purchase order. So I'm gonna pick that as my metric field, and I'm gonna aggregate that, okay? I'm gonna do a sum. It's gonna prompt me for an alias because we've now created a derived field, so we need to tell the system what we want to call it, and we'll call it total spend. All right. And real quickly, I want to show you that we're in the non-advanced view of the screen. There actually is an advanced view as well. Okay, and that converts what I just did simply in terms of the aggregation, now shows it as the underlying expression. Okay, sum of grand total. It was 2 fields in the non-simple, so it was real easy to pick it out. But you can, as soon as you go beyond that, this opens up a whole bunch of new power. There's all kinds of functions you can apply here. This particular example is very simple. But what's also exposed is the display as, the formatting that I talked about. And for some, we're really going to want to show in a currency, right? We're going to probably want to show maybe currency rounded. There's a bunch of different possibilities, currency thousands. We'll probably be adding more as we go here, but these seem good, you know. So I'm going to do that. If you saw the filter, just just to keep time, just in the essence of time here, let's keep going and not add a filter. That'll take a little time. I've shown you an example of what that looks like anyway. You can then sort. So I can sort, let's say, I really want to sort by, let's sort by total spend descending, because we want to see the top guys to the first, to the left, let's say, okay? And then I get an example of the summary data, right, that it's going to bring back. So I can say, oh, that looks right, or as a designer, or doesn't, or whatever. Looks good. I can see the formatting is what I want, that kind of thing. I hit finish, and now that data is shown in my chart. You can see the total spend by surgery is the highest. I can go over to chart styles. I can do things like, what do I want to do? I want to do, let's show the actual number that's represented here. Maybe on the y-axis, we want to show the label, total spend. I don't like how maybe these numbers are formatted, so there's a way to format the y-axis tick values. Again, with currency, let's go show currency like that. And that's overriding the total spend. So let's do currency thousands. Okay, fit a little better. Yeah, so I can obviously adjust this label to whatever I want it to be. I hope that answers the question. We can do a lot more, but I think we're in the interest of time. We want to limit what we do here. Sorry. Okay. Any other questions, Ashish? Ashish, you may be muted.
Oops, my apologies. A follow-up question to that was, is it possible to enhance that to show by month? But I'm really not sure what that means, because the axes are department and total spend. So,
yeah. So, so you'd want department by month, I guess is what they're asking. I think they can't respond to that question, but
no, yeah.
Yeah, not today. That's really a multi-dimensional question, and right now we support a single dimension. So we plan to deal with this with supporting multi-dimensions in the future, but also potentially with drill down. So you might click on emergency and then see a breakdown of emergency department by month. So the designer would actually design a separate bar chart behind this and actually set up a drill down to that. That's something we're planning. The multi-dimensional thing, we're not sure. That gets kind of complicated, and one of our goals here is to keep it very simple so that people don't have to like learn how to, learn a reporting tool, which itself can be daunting with complex reporting tools. We're trying to keep this very simple, but it'll be one of two ways that we deal with it, or maybe both in the future. But right now, I would say that with our initial version of this, we cannot do a multi-dimensional type breakdown, not yet.
Okay. All right, fantastic. Thank you, Eric. There were several other non-questions. There were comments that they loved the demo. It was very nice. So as did I. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending the webinar. It has been recorded, and we will be sending you an email with information on how to access that recording. If there are any specific questions we can answer, or if there are any other questions, not just about dashboards, but about frevvo in general, or any other issues, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can do so using the contact link on our website, www.frevvo.com. There's a contact right on top. Thank you again, and bye.
Thanks.